Selamat tengah hari and good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to the UN country team and UNU-IIGH seminar series on working local and thinking global. My name is Pascal Alote. I am the director of the United Nations University International Institute for Global Health, which is a UN think tank on global health hosted by the Malaysian government based here in Kuala Lumpur. To start off, a bit of housekeeping, if we can, Anne, just please put your name in the chat so we know where you're from, and keep your video on. Please remember to keep your microphones on mute so that we're not disturbed by background noises. As soon as you can, start putting your questions and answers in the chat box. We will hope to have a very lively engagement piece at the end of the formal presentation. Please share your thoughts and comments in the box, and if you like anything that you hear, please share with emojis. We're looking forward to your participation. Please enjoy the webinar. This is the first, for now, the first in this series this year. We haven't had this in a while, but the UN, this webinar series is an opportunity, was set up as an opportunity for the UN agencies in Malaysia to share what they do, why it matters, and how you can engage better as researchers, as policymakers, as citizens of Malaysia, and very much participants within the UN system. We are all part of the UN, and it's really important that we understand, that everybody understands what the UN does, and the purposes that it serves. So I am absolutely delighted to introduce to you the head of the UN in Malaysia, the UN resident coordinator, Ms. Karima El Khoury, who is responsible for Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei Darussalam. Ms. El Khoury brings to the position more than 20 years of experience in the international development arena, including both within the United Nations and externally. Within the organization, she has most recently led the 2030 Agenda Division at the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, a role she assumed after managing the population and development portfolio and pioneering the work of the Commission on International Migration, Population Aging, and Youth Empowerment. Before that, she served as a regional advisor on governance and project coordination at the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP. Prior to joining the United Nations, Ms. El Khoury worked in Morocco as a lecturer at the Al Aqayan University, as well as with a think tank engaging with government, civil society, private sector, academia, youth, and international organizations on development issues in the country. She holds a master's degree in applied linguistics from the Teachers College at Columbia University in New York, and a bachelor's degree in English from the Muhammad V University in Rabat, Morocco. The second presenter, and Karima will be sharing the presentation with Dr. Richard Marshall, who is the senior economist in the Office of the UN Resident Coordinator for Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei. He joined the United Nations in 2002 and has served in 5 other countries: Mongolia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bangladesh, Vietnam, and Cambodia. So clearly very well known in the region. He hails from the United Kingdom and has a PhD in economics from the University of Manchester. In Malaysia, Richard's work has focused on the socioeconomic impacts and policy responses to the COVID-19 pandemic, the tracking and reporting of SDG performance, including supporting Malaysia's voluntary national review, and research into the challenges faced by the undocumented population in Sabah. As you can see, we've got a couple of amazing presenters. I will repeat again, please put your questions and thinking caps on, because we hope to engage with you in a very active way after they have made their formal presentations. I am delighted, Karima, to hand over to you now.
Thank you very much, Pascal. Thank you for the introduction, and happy and privileged to be with you today. I want to extend our thanks to the UNU International Institute for Global Health for inviting the Resident Coordinator Office to initiate the 22 season of the seminar series. And thank you, Pascal, and your team for all the efforts to make it possible today. I'm here today with my colleague Richard Marshall, as you introduced him, and he's the senior economist at the UN Malaysia office. And we will try to address together the topic of evidence-based policymaking and the role of the UN in Malaysia. The outline briefly is going to be in 4 parts. We will start with talking a bit about the UN reform and its implications for delivering in Malaysia. The second part will focus more on the topic in terms of how the UN is positioned to support that transformation in policymaking in Malaysia. Part 3, which Richard will deliver, will be about the 3-part approach in terms of building, the evidence and the tools and platforms needed for policy making. And part 4 will be just sharing with you a few future direction ideas. Let me start with the UN reform, and it is important, although I know it's going to be loaded with acronyms, but I'll try to avoid them as much as possible. UNDS is the UN Development System Reform. There have been several reforms that were engaged actually by our UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, but I'll focus today on the UN Development System Reform. And basically, this reform came in response to a pressing necessity for the UN to be better fit for purpose. And that came after the SDGs were adopted in 2015. And their nature being universal, indivisible, and interlinked demanded a different approach. Transformation in the way that the countries that endorse them, will do business, and the concept of sustainability and what it implies for their policy making, but also in the way the UN actually does business. Briefly. It was necessary for us to step up our value proposition, to enhance our capacities, to engage in an innovative approach to resource mobilization, to look at the integration, of all the means of implementation, and also to be a bit more results focused. So that accountability angle was very, very important in the way the reform was conducted, so that we could provide, services and support to our member states that are coordinated, comprehensive, and integrated. And this means, truly and honestly, a culture change. Because we're trying to really move from a silo approach where UN entities have been for a long, long time working, according to their functions and mandates, but quite, in isolation from each other. Now it's an imperative actually of integration, both in terms of addressing the complexities of development, but also how to handle it from an agency and entity point of view. Let me share with you the quote by the UN Secretary General in terms of this cultural change that we need for greater collaboration across the pillars and for tangible results for the people on the ground. So it's really about impacting the lives of people. Next, please. What does it really mean for the work of the UN in Malaysia? Or concretely in how the setup has changed. It means an empowered resident coordinator that is free and delinked from other entities and really serving the Secretariat, representing officially the Secretary General, and being that kind of juncture and facilitating contact between the UN and the government and other partners. It also meant that we needed to beef up the office and the team of the RC office to really have the capacity and the competencies needed for the ambitions that we set forth. And also that compact between the UN and the government in the form of what we call the UN SDCF, which is the UN Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework, to be really that plan that outlines the different priorities and the approach of the UN in terms of working together. In the specific case of Malaysia, we're working along 4 main pillars: people, planet, prosperity, and peace. And we have a cross-cutting partnership pillar that is, very strong in terms of the bringing the whole of society approach. We also have a very important gender aspect in terms of mainstreaming, and of course, all of this anchored in human rights. We also needed a cohesive UN country team, and I was mentioning the silo approach. Now it's how to ensure that the 21 resident and non-resident agencies that work in Malaysia have the capacity and also have the tools that enable that coordination and better communication to happen. So, they work now via a joint programming and joint programs, and that bringing the different talents on board to address issues like, social protection or poverty or governance definitely brings more talents on the table, but also ensures better coordination and resource optimization. We're talking here also about the results. How do you ensure that we deliver for results in a very complex setup? Today, we know before the pandemic, but even more so after the pandemic, that we're talking about a complex nexus where we need to balance between economic growth, inclusive social development, environmental sustainability, good governance, and also, recognizing that there are trade-offs, choices to be made, but also synergies across these different pillars. And all of this, with human rights as our main guiding principle. Very briefly, next please, the United Nations in Malaysia, just a snapshot. So these are the entities that are either present or working in Malaysia from different regional or global offices, but we also have with us in Malaysia a number of service centers that have more of a global feature to them, and the UNU Institute is certainly one with much beyond Malaysia mandate. The RCO team is a small team, but as I said, we had to mobilize the expertise needed for this team to really support both the coordination, but also engage in the thought leadership and policy proposition to the government and other stakeholders. Moving now to the topic and quickly, the working local, thinking global is also about transforming the way we work and transforming the way we plan. And by default, this requires a number of conditions in place and a better understanding of what we're talking about. So that transformation is really a paradigm shift in looking at sustainability, but looking also at the way we do our work. The overall objective remains that we need to make the UN reform work for Malaysia, especially as an upper middle income country. How do we do that? And so far it has been through enabling the government to deliver on the SDGs, still as our converging agenda through national development plans, and also aligning with policies that aim to achieve those targets and goals. Keeping the 2030 agenda as our North Star. I think it's very important, especially as the pandemic has been a major distraction. But we do see that the SDGs provide an opportunity for that recovery to be more sustainable and to build the resilience and the long-term sustainable development. These SDGs were made by the member states of the United Nations. It's not a UN agenda. It is a member states agenda, and it it actually is open to be shaped and modified and customized to the needs of the country. So that country ownership is very important. We also need to remember that the SDGs frame and define development beyond the economic dimension, to bring in the social, the environmental, the political, but also the cultural, and that's also important. So to be able to match that ambition, we need sustainable development, to be looked at as a multifaceted, and of course about people and not leaving anyone behind. Transformation also means that next please, that policy making needs to be rational, it needs to be inscribed in a long-term vision, and also it needs to be fit for purpose. And to be able to do that, we need a robust evidence-based. We need to make sure that the decision-making does not happen ad hoc, does not happen based on, a shallow approach, that it happens based on a very in-depth analysis of the evidence that we have, that is done by institutions that are professional, responsive, aware, and have the capacity. And if they don't, then they need that support to develop those capacities. Success in achieving all of this, definitely requires that we look at the means of implementation. The SDGs alone aren't enough. What we need is this entire ecosystem for the SDGs to be, for the national goals and targets to be achieved. So it's a dashboard of complexities with a lot of blinking lights, and you want to make sure that that there's prioritization, that there is goal setting, that there's foresighting, that there's good planning happening, but you also want to make sure that the institutions are, strong and responsive and coordinated. There's that coherence aspect that needs to be there. We also need to look at the financial issues and what financing is available to push the agenda forward. Data is very important, and it's a component of evidence and of the base. And again, the voices, data that comes directly from the people, from the whole of society, that guides the work of the programming from the UN side, but also of the prioritization from a government perspective. How do we get there? I think it's it's about both the knowledge, the expertise, but also knowing what we're talking about. So I think understanding those complexities is very important. Bringing the know-how and the expertise to them to do things differently, to really shift towards a policy making that is transforming and transformative is what we're talking about. So with this, I thank you very much again for the opportunity. I'll come back with a few concluding points. But for now, let me hand over to Richard, who will walk us through how the UN is actually supporting this transformation and building the evidence for good policy making. Over to you, Richard.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Very good afternoon to everybody joining online. I think, as Karim has explained, my role today is to talk a bit about how the UN delivers on this approach. And we've identified that under three separate headings. So in our efforts and our activities, in bringing evidence to support policy, and of course then linking to this the theme of today's session, working local but thinking global. And those are, firstly, building the evidence base, building the analytical base. Secondly, developing tools, to help policymakers, mechanisms to support their decision-making and policy-making. And then third, helping the development of platforms. And these are, mechanisms, mediums for sharing information, for sharing data, sharing experiences, and obviously undertaking M&E. Now, I'll just run through some examples. Those are on the slide. And you can see how these all fit together in the diagram. I realize it's a little bit small. We've tried to include some of the examples. But I also want to emphasize that, the RCO and the RC is a coordinator of the activities. These activities are actually undertaken by agencies. Our role really is to ensure they happen and they get visibility and they're linked together. And then in certain areas to undertake certain these activities ourselves, where there's a need for some bridging or the provision of, I guess, a public good kind of role that the RCO performs in each of these pillars. So just to take the first one, evidence, and I've given you, hopefully you can read the writing, I realize it's pretty small. On building the evidence base, some key examples in the last year have been families on the edge, something I'll say more about shortly, which was a UNICEF UNFPA study that took place during the COVID pandemic in Malaysia. Secondly, I highlight the study of the undocumented in Sabah, which is still ongoing. This is an RCO-led activity that includes many agencies that are looking at the challenges faced by undocumented people in Sabah and the policy options that are available to government to tackle this issue. Third, I'd highlight actually a UNU study, which was on the health system and looking at a systems-based approach to reform, very high quality inputs, very analytical treatment of the issue. I think participants today will be aware of that. Fourth, I note UNIDO's work with enterprises, obviously UNICEF very much on the social side. During COVID, UNIDO have undertaken studies of the responses of businesses in Malaysia to the COVID pandemic. And that's been very useful. For example, the RCO has linked those two together through the socioeconomic response plan to draw out the connections between work on COVID. Finally, just highlight work undertaken by UNFPA with the University of Harvard on sexual and reproductive health and how that links to building human capital, another important study. So you can see some very diverse studies in building the evidence base. Moving to tools. First, a macroeconomic model, a very basic macro model that we're developing. I will also talk about, I'll come back to that shortly. SDG budgeting and costing, which is part of the Integrated National Financing Framework project, which is UNDP working with UNICEF and UNCDF. And additionally, under this heading, UNDP's work on nationally determined contributions as part of the efforts against climate change, which of course is Malaysia's contribution to efforts towards mitigation. A whole series of analytical inputs provided there that enable government to use tools to predict carbon levels, to predict the impact of taking certain choices and kind of model outcomes. And third, platforms, and three to highlight here. First, the Sdg Roadmap, which is also part of the INFF project, but with the RC also very much involved. We had phase one, we're heading towards phase two is currently under development. This provides a blueprint, a Malaysia blueprint for delivering the SDGs linking to government instruments like the 12th Malaysia Plan, a National Recovery Plan, and so forth. Second, FICRA, which is an Islamic finance fintech platform, which I'll describe shortly in more detail. And finally, Together for the SDGs, which is, although hosted by the RC, is actually contracted out to the Global Compact in Malaysia, which works with businesses on SDGs to deliver a platform for businesses and NGOs to link together to understand their ESG activities. So that's the overview. I'm now going to delve into each of those headings to show you in practical terms what that's meant. Thank you very much. Very good. Moving on to the next slide. The first is Families on the Edge. I think people watching may be familiar with this. It really attracted a lot of media attention during the COVID pandemic. It was a very innovative study. Families on the Edge selected 500 urban households, and it was a panel survey, and they returned to them 4 times during the pandemic to track how they were faring during the pandemic and successive imposition of MCO and then RMCO orders and tightening, then releasing their ability to work. Obviously, in these families, largely in the informal sector, very much the bottom of the distribution, solidly within the B40 group, and this tracked both quantitative outputs, so measuring their poverty levels, their nutrition they were able to access for their families, but it also tracked their opinions and how they felt about the future and how secure they felt. And this provided very unparalleled and very high quality data set, because of course it was a panel survey, so you can track the trajectory of change, and it has a very strong statistical basis for that reason. And it really underscored the vulnerability of these households and the importance both of their access to work and the importance of social protection transfers in supporting them through the pandemic. And government was extremely interested, perhaps a little bit fearful of this study, but because it was controversial and media picked it up many times. But I think it's also true that this study was able to influence policy. And if anybody has time, it's really good to try to look at the output they produce. It's a real, very strong example, I'd say, of the UN bringing analytical work to deliver something which was policy relevant, but also politically salient. Let's move to the next example. Okay, under the heading of tools, I'm going to quickly introduce you to the macroeconomic model the RCO has been leading with a team of consultants. I guess there must be some economists joining us today, but I'll try and explain how it works for non-economists. This is a very basic model within what we call a general equilibrium model. So it allows us to change one variable in the economy, and then through feedback, there are changes elsewhere in the economy. We're able, therefore, to estimate the net effect of a change, either a policy change or an exogenous shock, something which shocks the economy like COVID, or a trade shock, or something of that nature, or a policy choice the government might make. And it relies on something called the social accounting matrix. That is the table you see on the slide. And the social accounting matrix simply depicts flows within the economy from different actors in the economy and illustrates their distribution. So if I could ask the person controlling the clicker to click once. Yeah, click again. Click again. You okay? Stop there. So the first part, essentially we use the model then to change the framework into a simulation tool, into a simulation equation. So we have on this side exogenous variables. These are things caused by something we change, something like the output level, some other macroeconomic variables. Can we ask the clicker to click again? Yeah, and again. Okay, and these are the exogenous variables in the matrix. These are things we change or would be subject to a shock. So, y equals a function of x. We change x, and then we see what happens to y. If we click again, yeah, keep clicking. We can click 3 times now. Yes, so these are the leakages from the flow, and then these are unrelated variables. So you can see that's how the model works in a very, very quick way. It will deliver simulations of different events. So it's very useful for policy analysis by changing something in the X box, the X area of the matrix, and that delivers a Y result. So it's very useful for policy analysis. You could change a policy and see what that does to the economy, and then we're able to simulate what the level of GDP would be, or what another macroeconomic aggregate would be. And the idea is, this is a very basic model at this stage. There are more sophisticated models as we move to a full CGE model, a full computable general equilibrium model in time. But the idea is to provide an entry-level model to allow agencies, academics, and think tanks and NGOs to do their own policy analysis work and deliver and to provide a supportive economic case to any advocacy they're undertaking. And we will make this available online and open source. If we go to the next slide, just to give you a flavor, just to understand, so you know where we are, and also to give you a flavor of what's possible. We're very close to completion now. We've held seminars. We've been developing this in partnership with DOSM. We've held seminars with the NCT, with DOSM. We've had many inputs back from that. We also ran a simulation, and you see in the table, we have this simulation. And the simulation we chose was to look at the measures the government adopted in the 2022 budget to support COVID recovery. And what we did to test the model was to see what would have happened to Malaysia had those policy measures been adopted in 2020. And then we get the results shown in the table. You can see different simulations building up to a final simulation where we apply all these policy choices. So you can see if government had adopted support to cash transfers, support, if it had adopted the current employment package it has, if it had increased government spending, then you would see a progressive improvement in the economy's performance. So, moving from GDP of minus 5.6% to, in the end, GDP of only minus 3.4%. So the model is clearly working in that sense. We're now close to completion, as I said. The next stage is to roll this out and prepare a much more user-friendly spreadsheet type arrangement that we can publish online. The reason I spend a bit more time on it here, this is something I think academics and others would be interested in, and we're also very keen to have a dialogue on this, perhaps through a separate event. Let's move to my final slide. So my final slide, which is under the platforms heading, and this is about FICRA. I'm told Fikra means ideas in Arabic. Karima will confirm that for us. And Fikra is an Islamic finance fintech platform. The idea is to help Islamic finance fintech startups. It's a platform run by or developed by the UNCDF, and their partner is the Securities Commission of Malaysia. And the way it operates is a portal for information, and I've given you a picture from their website. You perhaps check it out. You have the link at the bottom. But the platform also crucially runs a competition every year that invites applicants to come forward with their app, their online tool to develop fintech in Malaysia, and it's run competitively. And then they receive a package of support in terms of mentoring, in terms of finance, in terms of linkages with other actors and with the regulatory agencies. So just very much to finish, this is now underway. Their call for proposals ended at the end of last year, and they had around 30 applications and now working with 7 pilots which are going forward. I will now hand back to Karima to conclude and close the session.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks very much. Just again, before closing, perhaps on this slide, we've tried to just summarize a number of future directions, but it's really more ideas that shape our future directions and partnership with government and non-government development players in Malaysia. The first one is how to continue or the need to continue to build the evidence-based portfolio of work, and that definitely works towards building or strengthening the UN's credibility with the government and other development partners, but also works to make us the go-to place in a way for the government, but also for others. And the fact that this evidence is accessible, the access is open, and the communication around it is enhanced, I think makes it more easier, I would say, to use and accessible to everyone. The second is about the capacity and the substance of what we do. The focus on the priorities, understanding where Malaysia needs that evidence and where the change needs to happen to build for it that base and ensure that the work is commensurate with quality criteria, and that we invest what it needs to make it certainly of excellent quality and usability. The third is about our work and this, the reform and the role for the RC and the RCO to pursue innovation, to engage actively, to coordinate, and to help the UNCT, create for it the atmosphere for building, mechanisms that drive really high caliber input. We need our value to be, addition to be definitely of the highest caliber. The fourth point is about recentering our efforts on recovery, and today I think is an important juncture, because we are seeing hopefully the premise of the pandemic moving off, and also we're seeing emerging a number of needs that need to needs that have our attention, including preparedness for disasters, including preparedness for future shocks. And this is where the UN comparative advantage comes to play, because what Malaysia is going through is definitely something it can share with other countries, but some other countries have also had found some solutions to how to build a better preparedness tools. The UNSDCF, our cooperation framework, to remain our guiding framework, and here we recognize that it needs also to be agile. It needs to be more flexible. It needs to really take into account all these changes. Nobody had predicted the pandemic, and a lot of countries have seen all their plans, needed to be, revised, and the evidence for that revision and the planning and programming had to be produced quickly. So we need to make sure that flexibility remains. And last but not least, the partnerships. And I think it's beyond just working with the government or informing the government, but also ensuring that the stakeholders, from the academic academic circle, from the think tanks, the NGOs and nonprofit organizations are also engaged. They provide also, and they produce very important evidence and data, especially at the local level. And I think it's important for that to come up. I also want to highlight, before I close, the importance, of engaging in South-South cooperation, engaging in North-South cooperation and triangular cooperation for Malaysia and its position in the region and in the ASEAN landscape, but also the Asia Pacific and globally. There's a lot to share across different countries, and I think policy making and the transformation we aspire to can happen with those elements in place. So thank you again very much for giving us the time to share with you these different pieces, and happy to respond or answer any question. Over to you, Pascal.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm sure I speak on behalf of everyone who is online that this was an incredibly useful presentation to hear about the work that you do. I have quite a few questions here for you, but I will, and I don't know whether you want to take a batch of questions and then come back, or I'll kind of put them together thematically. So one is, how do you get access to the information for the work that you do? So how do you access the evidence you use? How robust do you believe it is? And given there are quite a few members from the audience here who are academics, what would be your concrete asks of the academic community and civil society, and how can they engage directly with you? There's a few in there, so I'll drop those for you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for this, and I think maybe to keep it as a conversation, and because this part is definitely not planned, so I will just chip in a few answers and let also Richard come in as needed. Perhaps to start with the access to the information that builds the evidence, as you noted from a few examples here, and I think they're quite illustrative of the way we work. First is partnership. You will see that very few of the work that we do is driven entirely just by the UN. I think it relies very much on the academic, and this also talks to your second question, to the academic networks, to the information that comes from science, from research studies. But there's also, and it was mentioned by Richard, the surveys and the direct work that is done in terms of gathering data firsthand and using that. So I think the robustness comes from that combination of getting the information directly and also relying on expertise. And I think today, in terms of policies related to, let's say, climate action, for instance, they're entirely based on scientific research that has been done over decades. But the UN continues to support and engage. I'll move to Richard perhaps, and then talk to civil society.
Okay, I haven't got a huge amount more to say. I mean, I think reliability and relevance is extremely important for evidence. It's vital that UN agencies use evidence that is extremely robust, and I think all agencies, and also within the RC, we're very keen to undertake quality control and to undertake some kind of audit of sources. That's very, very important to us. The two things I would mention, though, is we try to use government data where we can. That's a standard approach of the UN. We have an arrangement with DOSM, with the Department of Statistics Malaysia. This actually is, we're developing an MOU with them. Apparently we can't call it an MOU. We have to call it an LOI. Lawyers in New York call it MOU. I shouldn't have said that. And this will allow the free exchange of data between DOSM and UN agencies, subject to a non-disclosure agreement, which we also pared down. So I think with them, they're quite, but we still have issues with them. There are still times we have issues, and in those cases, I think we try very clearly to, if it's a UN publication, to make clear where there might be an issue. And then secondly, the work we do our own, we try, UN agencies will ask for peer review of studies they do themselves, but every study we should do ourselves, should have an adequate approach to sampling. It should be representative. We look for robustness, and also in that how samples are taken, not simply afterwards. We try and control the process. But again, in the field, there are lots of issues that we face all the time, and sometimes we have to make choices. I mean, the one I quote is SABA, for example. The SABA study we're involved in. Because it's of the undocumented. It's very difficult to use a standard sampling approach. You go to the census and you would draw a sample randomly and you'd stratify it properly. So we have to use different techniques, and there we had to use what the people tend to call a snowballing technique. So we go to some hopefully representative people and then snowball outwards from them. But that technique is I agree, people will probably pull me up on it now in the questions. I'm waiting for the objections. But we disclose in that case. We use the data, we try and clean it, but we also disclose in that case where we might have an issue. So I probably talk more than I should actually. So.
Just on the civil society, just if you allow me just a couple of sentences. I think, again, development is not happening just at the government level. I think and that partnership and awareness of the role of civil society and of the academic institutions and think tanks and research centers is becoming more and more visible because of that interface that needs to be protected and promoted and encouraged. Without science, there could be no policies for carbon pricing. Without science, we cannot, engage in, health system reform. So all of that is not coming just from the UN, because the UN isn't a group of scientists. The UN are, development players. So I think those partnerships are, by default there. But the reform, as I said earlier, is about, okay, well, how to do things, how to step up the game, and engaging more with civil society and academia. And academia is definitely part of it.
Yeah, I should mention. Sorry, I had to come back in. When we do studies, we work through consultants, or we work through think tanks, we work through NGOs, we work through academic institutions. So, for example, SABA is undertaken by the University of Malaysia. SABA, the UNS SABA did the survey. With their academics leading on that work. So we would always try also to engage others in directly what we do.
Great, thank you, Richard. And while you're on the podium, a quick one for you. We do have people internationally, not just from Malaysia, on the line, and they want to know whether the macroeconomic model can be used, is transferable to other countries, and how would that be? How could that be organized?
Yeah, sure. So what we're trying to build is a very basic model. It's what they call a multiplier model. So it's kind of entry level in this type of modeling, and it relies on. I showed the social accounting matrix. If you were going to apply it in different countries, you would have to use you would have to use the country-specific social accounting matrix. So most statistical organizations around the world will produce a social accounting matrix, and it's a matter of then finding somebody with these skills in a university or a consultant, or perhaps look to the UN or the World Bank. Or once you have the building block is the SAM, the social accounting matrix, and that is country specific, usually produced by a statistical organization. Sometimes they ask a development partner to produce one for a country. But this is, I guess, I've done this in Vietnam, I've done this in Cambodia. So I've worked on this kind of thing in several countries, but so it's easily transferable. The technique's very, very common, and the sophistication builds. I explain we're at the entry level, which is just using the multiplier effects, and then if you allow for more, basically, as you allow for more interactions. So you move to what a static CG, then a dynamic CG. You're allowing for more, so you allow for price change, allow for supply response rather than simply demand responses. But it's a technique that's easily replicated. It should be possible to do. Yeah.
Fantastic. So the next batch of questions relate to impact and monitoring the demonstrating and monitoring the impact of the work done by the UN. And I have a question that says, specifically in relation to the families on the edge, can you give examples of insights from the survey that impacted policy? What was the data also that was used to understand the impact of policies during COVID? For example, on the numbers of the B40 households, poverty levels, health and nutrition.
Go ahead.
Me, okay.
Definitely.
Okay, so Families on the Edge. Families on the Edge tracked a number of outcomes, and it went back to these 500 households. Now, obviously, they weren't representative for Malaysia. They're representative for the urban poor. That's the way that the survey was designed. So, one of its advantages was that it was extremely tailored. It was extremely newsworthy, but it wasn't a comprehensive picture of what happened to the B40 or other groups during the COVID crisis. And there was very little of that, actually. It was only until, I think, I guess in 2021, DOSM produced poverty estimates for, to well into the kind of mid-late stage 2020. I think people probably saw those. So actually, there was very little tracking, I think, of what the poverty outcomes were. And, because the nature of these kind of variables are, they're lagging variables. They're not leading indicators. They're lagging indicators. It's something which happens after the effect. The first effects of COVID would be you lose your job or prices go up or something like that. And then it's felt in your poverty, which is somewhat lagging to the initial impact. So the survey, to be clear, was good because it focused on this small group and it was in real time. So we're able to look very, very rapidly in 3 stages what was happening to them. And because we went back to the same people all the time, that enabled Families on the Edge to tell a very convincing story. So it had very nice statistical properties because it was a panel survey. And the things it tracked are income and consumption, and some of their behaviors in relation to schooling and to the access to healthcare. And it asked the same questionnaire 3 times, kind of after the initial MCO, then 3 months later, I think September, October, and then again it went back to them again at the end of the year in December. So this enabled us to say through the pandemic what was happening to this group. And there were some very interesting insights. First, you saw enormous increases in poverty. This group generally were employed in the informal sector. These are urban poor households. They often worked in informal jobs. That was a sector that was hit very hard. People lost their jobs. So we saw large increases in unemployment, and that very quickly fed through into their poverty level and also into their nutrition level. You saw straight away families changing the mix of what they ate. So they ate more vegetables and more rice and less meat. You saw very, very rapidly this move through, and it really exemplified their vulnerability. And the other interesting thing was, and this is where I think it had an effect on policy, it showed as you had more access to employment again, as they were able to start working again. You saw the improvement in outcomes, in terms of their poverty and, and then their nutritional standards. Of course, it also tracked how they felt, about how their personal stories from the crisis supplemented them with testimonies. And this made it extremely newsworthy. I don't know anybody caught Dr. Mohammed Khalid or even Stephen Barrett from UNICEF on TV talking about the survey. And this made government, I think, take a lot of notice of it. And I think latterly you could see two things struck me that had an effect. Firstly, on the cash transfer, government had several distributions. I don't know them. I don't know whether there's BSH or BPN. They keep changing the initials. So I know, the transfers they made to the B40. I think they retimed one of those, or I can't say for certain, but they seem to be more interested in dispersing more through that scheme. I think also some of their thinking on opening up the economy and how much work they could permit was also being influenced by the debate that Families on the Edge drove. I mean, I cannot say we can't attribute or anything like that, but it certainly added to a debate around how COVID was affecting, poor people in particular, vulnerable people in particular.
Yeah. Karima, did you want to add anything else, or can I go to the next question?
Please go ahead. Please, I think it's quite exhaustive.
Okay, so this is another slightly mischievous one, perhaps. But what would you say? Can you share some of the major challenges in your work, generally, and how it relates to Malaysia?
Wow, the list is very long, but But again, I mean, as you know, I mean, I've been here 6 months now, and before that, I was working, on helping, countries in the Middle East and North Africa and the Gulf region roll out, the 2030 agenda, make it their own, and deliver, for the people everywhere. And of course, it was a different region, and conflict was definitely, part of our daily life. So the experience in Malaysia is different. However, I must say there's some trends that I still see, similar here in Malaysia. Perhaps the first one would be the level of coordination and communication that the 2030 agenda, because as I said, it's indivisible in nature, interlinked, the dimensions very much forming a nexus, and you can talk about growth if you're not really talking also about what it does to the environment, and you can't really talk about social development without looking at, if you invest in young people, what happens to the older persons and to the younger children. So all of that, I mean, it's a systems, right, a package, and addressing it like a system is perhaps now the pressure that has been on the UN to be better coordinated, to work together, to bring all the entities, together, expertise-wise, but also, mandate-wise and constituency-wise. It's not really always happening at the government side. That is perhaps something that makes our work a little challenging, because the UN is trying to be more and better coordinated, to teach, I like this expression, to teach the silos how to dance and how to really kind of move together. But I'm not really seeing a lot of that happening more systematically at the level of the government yet. I don't want to say at all, but it's not there yet. And when I talk about transformative policy making, it is about those institutions really talking to each other. You have to have, the Ministry of Social Affairs, talk to the Ministry of Planning, and also Ministry of Health, and also Ministry of Home Affairs. It is very much about the people. So if a person does not have, a civic registration, and we're expecting them to produce, and we're expecting them to be at school, something is actually not working. So I think that lack of coordination is typical, but it needs to change, because there is no way out of it in a way. So I think our role is also to advocate, that level of institutional coordination and mechanisms that facilitate that.
Great.
I think it's a big difficulty already in our job, but the rest is fine. It's been enjoyable so far, and challenging, but a lot of good things happening.
Okay, that's really good to hear. And the few minutes left, I think, a really important point to make. So, given the global challenges at the moment, and the really unfortunate situation in Europe, Eastern Europe, what should we be thinking about in Malaysia from the UN's perspective?
It's. I was expecting a question similar to this. I think we can't disconnect anything that we say today, especially, being the UN, from what's happening. I think I'll speak from a UN perspective, and perhaps that is also talking to Malaysia and Malaysia's position. The first thing is what's happening in globally and in Ukraine in particular. I just want to convey the Secretary General global message, and it's everywhere in the media, that the UN is committed to staying and delivering for everyone affected by the conflict. That we are seeing over 1 million people that have fled across borders because of war, and even before the offensive, humanitarian agencies have been supporting and reaching over 3 million people in the East. We're committed to supporting, committed to work hand in hand with our partners. And we definitely call for the end of hostilities and open, the door to dialogue and diplomacy, and that's what the UN, is for. Now, What it means for Malaysia, it's not really my position to say. However, what we know is that the worst possible thing that happens is disruption, right? And the causes of disruption are multiple. In the specific case of Malaysia, which does offer a very secure environment, and I think the most challenging part is going to be climate. What we saw in December is an example, and it's not a one-off thing that we will again see disappear for 50 years. It's going to happen again. Disasters, climate-induced catastrophes are looming ahead, and Malaysia needs to be prepared. Better prepared, not just to face and respond, in terms of relief and emergency response, but actually to plan ahead. And planning ahead, meaning that the climate ambition needs to be delivered on. It's challenging. It is not going to be easy, but for a country like Malaysia, with its resources, biodiversity, but also its geographic and position, it needs to be to step up its efforts in terms of policies that combat climate change, that prepare societies and communities and all the vulnerable people within Malaysia that are today living in regions that are prone to disaster, prone to vulnerability. I believe this is what lies ahead, and globally, I think the report published this week is rings the bell for alarm. It's another, the IPCC report. It's another call for the urgency and the catastrophic outcome if we don't do anything. So I think Malaysia is on track. I think it came out of Glasgow maybe better aware and hopefully more engaged. And we will have to see this materialize in terms of policies and decisions that have to be made.
Fantastic. Any last words, Richard? Brief?
No, I think Karima said it all. Nothing from me.
Okay, so we can't see the audience, but I hope you all join with me in applauding and saying a very big thank you to Karima and to Richard for this wonderful hour that they have spent with us, sharing with us what how the UN works in country. And thank you for launching the series. It's been a little bit dormant with the COVID lockdowns and so on, but we are really going to be ramping it up. I'll take this opportunity to wish everyone a happy Women's Day coming up on the 8th of March next week. And to not quite coinciding with it, but the next webinar that we're expecting will be with the UNFPA team, the UNFPA director, to discuss issues around population and gender and the mandate of UNFPA here in Malaysia. Karima, thank you very much. Richard, thank you. And would you allow me? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to take this opportunity to extend an invitation to a virtual event that we are organizing, the entire UN family on Women's Day. So it's going to be on the 8th of March, and if you allow us, we would like to perhaps disseminate the invitation to all your audience. And it's going to be about women and girls and how they are impacted by the environment, but also, impact, the environment sustainability. So this is the theme for this year, and it would be great if, your constituency could also join. Thank you.
Excellent. Yes, we will disseminate that widely as well. So thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for joining. Here is access to further information on this presentation, on what we do, and access to what the UN country team does as well. Please remain engaged. It's really important that you stay informed about all the things that are happening globally and how they might impact on you. And we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thank you all very much and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
you.